How are you this week? And welcome back to another edition of the Loaded Radio podcast. And I'm your host, Scott Penfold. And, well, buckle up because we got a monster of an interview lined up for you this week, okay? That's right. We're going to be sitting down for a one-on-one chat with the legendary vocalist himself, Tim Lambesis. Now, for those unfamiliar, Tim is the frontman for not just one, but two essential powerhouse bands, the iconic As I Lay Dying and the brutal force that is the hilarious but still pretty brutal and awesome thrash metal band, Austrian Death Machine. Now we're going to be diving deep into both worlds with Tim. Now obviously, Tim has seen his share of controversy, spending some time in incarceration. But this is a show about music. It's about metal. It's about talking about those genres of music, and that's what we're going to be doing this week with Tim, okay? First up, we're going to be dissecting Austrian Death Machine's latest release, Quad Brutal. That dropped this past February, and we're really going to get inside of that album and that band as well. I'm a huge fan of Austrian Death Machine, and I mean, if you have a sense of humor and if you love Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's definitely a band that I'm sure you know about if you haven't checked out already. As I Lay Dying fans, we're not going to leave you in the dust either, okay? We're going to be grilling Tim on the status of new music from the band, how things are working out with the new members in the lineup, if he still talks to maybe some of the older members, and anything else that, that maybe you want to know about the band, I'll be asking him, okay? So crank the volume up on this one, grab your favorite beverage of choice, and let's get ready to get into our discussion with Tim Lambesis from Austrian Death Machine and As I Lay Dying. Now, this podcast, of course, brought to you by LoadedRadio.com. Be sure to check that out for all your hard rock and metal news, constantly updated, as well as a 24-hour live radio station there featuring live personalities, big-name interviews, niche programming, and tons of hard rock and metal played for you constantly, okay? So that's there for you, too. And as well, you can download the free Loaded Radio app where you can listen to the stream and get all your news and even get this podcast wherever you go, right on your device, okay? All right, so we got that out of the way. And joining us now here on the Low Radio podcast this week is the one and only frontman for As I Lay Dying and Austrian Death Machine. I'm talking about Tim Lambesis. Tim, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining us on the Low Radio podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
I got to ask you, man, did you think that Austrian Death Machine would still be around in 2024?
Well, I always wanted to do another album, but I always felt like I need to wait for the right timing. And so I didn't really have like a deadline. And, with everything in my personal history, I felt like, hey, I should really wait until I've really established, where I'm at from a place of sincerity before people hear me, out there having fun and telling jokes. And I don't think like just because a person has been previously incarcerated means they can't like tell a joke or have fun. But I do think that there's like a moment in which it's just like a little too soon. So it just felt right. 10 years later, it felt like it was ready to go.
We're down back with Quad Brutal too. And I was introduced to you guys with Triple Brutal. I mean, obviously the big Arnold aspect is there. It's a big part of it. When originally did you set out, was it kind of meant to be like a joke, or did you always kind of mean for this thing to go somewhere?
Well, when I did the first record, I was actually, I just self-produced it, and I wasn't sure if a record label would even release it, because I thought like, maybe metal heads don't have enough of a sense of humor to like, actually for this thing to sell or anything like that. So I just made it like, really, I own a recording studio, and I just figured I'll make this record and it'll be fun for me. And I'm sure it'll at least cover its cost of making it since I, self-produced it. But then when the owner of Metal Blade Records heard it, he was like, he loves thrash music, right? And it was very thrash oriented. And he just like, I love this. He's like, I want to put it out. And I was kind of shocked that he wanted to put it out to begin with. And then when the record came out, it started doing well. And I was like, okay, metalheads do have a bit more of a sense of humor than I gave him credit for. So, there's something to build off of. And I've been enjoying it ever since.
Now, did you really build the project around Chad Ackerman's ability to do Arnie's voice so well? Was that what it was built around?
Well, so when him and we grew up together, and I actually used to like pick him up on the way to church sometimes, like when I was, because I had my driver's license, I was a few years older than him, and so we grew up together, and he would do these like little Arnold jokes like here and there, and so when I had the concept in my mind, it just immediately was like, okay, this is the guy to do it. And I mean, he lived right down the street. It was awesome. It was just very seamless to do the whole thing.
You spent a lot of time in the gym. Do you think that the gym scene was massively influential in starting the project as well?
Well, the interesting thing for me is that I'm really into the gym, or have been consistent with it at least for the last, would you say maybe like, almost 15 years now. But when I first started Austrian Death Machine, the first couple years, I actually didn't go to the gym at all. I just really loved his action movies, and I respected his work ethic. And I grew up playing sports, and so I had some athletic background and stuff like that. But it really wasn't until later that I got to appreciate that. I've always appreciated it in the sense of like I see the work ethic, like I mentioned, but in terms of me actually incorporating that into the music, I was just like a really skinny kid.
But I mean, but why Arnold though? Why Schwarzenegger? Like, is it just because of his movies, or is it because of who he is?
Well, for me, like growing up from a nostalgic standpoint, there's really no person in the world from like the 80s and 90s. I was born in the 80s, so there's really nobody in the world that had more like classic one-liners. If you're gonna like, all these like traditional hardcore bands, they're always trying to have these like big sing-alongs, right? Because they don't sing, right? They just their chorus is like this chantable thing that they want the crowd to be involved in, right? And it's like, well, there's only so many of those phrases out there in life, for these hardcore bands to try to sound tough and to try to sound like, they said something profound. And I was like, if you're really gonna have like big chorus one-liners, nobody in the world has more than Arnold himself.
I gotta ask, have you ever spoken with him, or has he ever reached out, or is there ever any contact with him about this?
There's only been rumors about it. I talked to somebody at one point that worked in his office when he was doing the governor stuff, and yeah. So during that time, that person said, "Oh yeah, I think Arnold's heard it, but it was like a rumor, right?" So it's like I don't really know. And then I went to see him speak one time, and I got there like 5 minutes late, and the room was sold out. So that's the closest I've gotten so far.
So you never actually had the chance to shake his hand and say, "Hey, I'm part of this band." I never had a chance.
I know, and I wish that people still had CD players in their cars, because if they did, then I'd carry a CD with me and hand it to him and insist that he'd listen to it on his way home.
That'd be great, because you know what? Chad nails that voice, man. Like when I first heard it, I thought that you actually had Arnold involved with the album. I really did. I mean, Chad nails it.
Yeah, and it's interesting on different albums. We've had actually. There's different professional voice actors that have contributed to different parts, and then more recently, I realized that if I can't use like the official movie clips because of the copyrights and all that kind of stuff, but from some of Arnold's inspirational speeches, those are actually open, free game, I guess, right? Because it's like if you record somebody, if they're doing your commencement speech at your college and they give you an inspirational speech and you wanted to use a clip, that's not owned by anybody. So I was able to actually use some clips on this most recent record. So it's expanded in its own way, and it's kind of created I don't know, I guess I have like a soundboard of material if I ever want to figure out for live concerts, what am I going to use going through the PA.
Tell me about Don't Be Lazy. Where did that song come from for you?
That song was, kind of that like kidding but also serious, like if you go to the gym and there's like that person who does the leg press, and everybody can put more weight on the leg press than they can on something else, so this person loads up like 500 pounds on the leg press, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next person that comes up to leg press is like some sweet old grandma that is like there for like rehabilitative, like she's trying to do physical therapy or something like that, and she needs, and this some jerk like leaves the whole thing like loaded up with 500 pounds, and it's like I've seen that happen a bunch of times, and so now I want like an anthem to where like if these guys are listening to this music, at least hey, it's a reminder, but if not, then it's at least that relatable frustration for people like me that see that they can kind of like in their minds, have that song to at least have an outlet for that frustrating moment.
I also got to ask you about recording with your wife Danny on Destroy the Machines. How was that experience, and how did that come about?
So she originally was just hanging out in the studio with us when we were recording No Pain, No Gain, which was the first single. And we actually recorded it sort of in the order that the singles came out, because I didn't record the album all at once. And so we recorded No Pain, No Gain, and everybody was shy that day, particularly Craig Goliath, the guest vocalist, because he's been a musician for a very, very long time, but in terms of like he was visiting me in San Diego in a new environment, and just was kind of like, I don't really know how the studio works and everything. And Danny's like, you know what? Let me get in there. I'll show you, because I kept on talking about the song, the parts that I wanted him to record, and he's like, I'm not really sure if I know exactly what you mean. And Danny's like, you know what? Let me give you an example. And she'd had a couple drinks, and she'd never sang into a microphone before, and just went in and just let it rip. And all of us were like mind blown, our jaws dropped, and we're like, what just happened right now? So then after that was done, I was like, you know what, I got to write a song or a couple songs for her to sing. And that's really the birth of her being a guest vocalist on this project.
Can you see Danny doing more stuff in music?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually writing all the guitars and bass and well, just all the instruments for her debut EP, and we're gonna put together like a traditional band and stuff. But at this moment, she's got, this is her words, not mine. Her favorite songwriter in the world, paired together with, one of my favorite vocalists in the world, which is her. And it's kind of cool too for me to not be the front person in a band. I like that actually because I started playing music originally because I wanted to be a songwriter.
Now, I do have to ask, I mean, with As I Lay Dying going on as well, you guys are going to be hitting the road with Chelsea Grin and stuff like that coming up in the months ahead. Do you find it difficult, juggling the two, like these two massive acts right now?
It's a little bit difficult at times, and it feels sometimes a little bit overwhelming when like unexpected things happen. If everything worked like perfectly as planned, then I wouldn't feel overwhelmed, but there'll be something like, say, I did some like limited pressing vinyl, right? That sold out for Austrian Death Machine. And I said, I'm going to hand number and hand sign them all. And then, you get like 250 copies, which is because it's very limited. So it's a special thing for a certain group of fans. And then 50 of them get lost in international shipping from the European vinyl manufacturer. And all of a sudden that's like, now I have this problem of like contacting 50 people. And it's like, okay, stuff like that. I mean, I'm not prepared for that in my schedule, right? You have to like individually write 50 people and tell them what's going on and ask them, what do they want to do and how sorry I am. And it's not my fault, but at the same time, this chaotic thing. When things like that happen, it's just stressful because it's like I'm sort of like the guy working 2 or 3 jobs, you know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, do you find it gets overwhelming though? Do you find like you just want to like take a step back sometimes and just, chill out for a bit?
Yeah, for sure. And I do find that balance. I go through like little phases, where I'm almost like obsessively just want to be in the studio and just write songs for like 6 months, and I'll do like 2 or 3 albums worth of material, and then I'll just be like, I don't even want to step in the studio, and I won't even go in the studio for like another year after that because I'll be on tour and I'll be doing all kinds of other things, and it's just sort of the way my brain works. And I'm sure there are better, healthier ways, but that's what's always worked for me.
What's currently happening with As I Lay Dying? I know that you'd mentioned previously that there is a new LP dropping this year. Is that still the plan? Is there still new stuff coming this year?
Yeah, so we've had this this back and forth mixing the record where the record's been done for quite a while, and we're just trying to find the like right representation of the sound. And with modern music, I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's because classically, as an example, there used to be like 5 or 6 guys that were great at mixing in metal, and now you have so many different approaches to it. And we're just really trying to find that sound where it marries together the nostalgic like sound that As I Lay Dying is known for with like a little bit of a modern twist to it. And for whatever reason, that part's been delaying the process, but the record's actually done. It just needs to finish the mix.
Is there like a title or anything, or is there like anything you can reveal about the album at this point?
Shoot, I wish I could actually give you the title. Unfortunately, Phil, our guitar player, and I have like a slight disagreement over what the album title should be. Like we both love the same concept, and we're just sort of toying with the words a little bit. So,
okay. What about the sound of the album? I mean, you mentioned that you're still kind of looking for that sound, but I mean, is it a straight up As I Lay Dying album? Can people expect that when they hear this?
Yeah, I think I wrote one of the like really like heavy leaning songs on the record. I feel like it's one of the heaviest songs that's ever been in the As I Lay Dying catalog. And then Phil wrote a lot of melodic songs that are sort of, the both of us worked on some songs that are sort of in the middle, I guess you could say. And then he worked on a couple, I think, that stretch in like a new sense of melody for us. It's not necessarily like anything groundbreaking. Like it's not going to like shatter people's minds. Like, oh my gosh, it barely sounds like As I Lay Dying, but just kind of stretch our sound a little bit in each direction.
You've got a new lineup that you're in there working with. How do you find working with this new lineup for As I Lay Dying? Is it refreshing for you? Is it a breath of fresh air? Like, is there some like a learning curve? How do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, a breath of fresh air is really the best way to describe it because you have this situation where like Phil and I have been writing songs together for 20 years or a little more than 20 years at this point. Or actually about 20 exactly right now. And we have our method down, and that's been the same regardless of who's been in the band in terms of, when it comes to writing an album, the two of us feel a lot of pressure is on our shoulders. And then sometimes you get guys in the band that over time, it's not a complaint. This just happens. This is natural. They're just over time, they're not in the primary songwriting role. And so they just kind of, that they feel like a little bit, like uninterested or fatigued or like lose their passion over time because they're not part of the core songwriting. And I think what happens when these new guys have come in, not only are they able to kind of contribute to like the way that they put their stamp on each song, but like for Phil and I, we're thinking like knowing how Nick Pierce plays drums as an example, like we can write songs around his his ability as a drummer, and it kind of gives Phil and I like this excitement for writing again. And then thinking about Ryan's voice, being a voice that's never been on an As I Dying record before as a second vocalist, and I start to think like, wow, like I can really like experiment and try all these different things, and he's just down to do everything to try. Not all my ideas are good, but he's down to try 100 different things, and he's just incredible work ethic. So it just those are a couple of examples of why it feels refreshed and very exciting for Phil and I, even though the process is sort of the same in a lot of ways as well.
But do you still find that sometimes you do kind of wish that classic lineup had stuck together and that you guys did move forward?
Well, I will always owe a lot to the years of hard work we spent in a van, like in some of the earlier days, and then of course like in a bus touring together for so many years. And so for that reason, I do appreciate and have a great sense of gratitude for I guess what people call the classic lineup. In a behind the scenes kind of situation, I do feel like I don't really miss some of the behind the scenes stuff, and not because I have anything more to say, but just I think over time people just they can't keep the same sense of excitement about something when they're not putting their stamp on the sound creatively. And it's not that we were ever like closing the door for Nick or Jordan to be able to write songs as an example, but that just in reality that just never happened. They weren't really like a big part of the creative contribution. I think it just connects people differently, and so like Phil and I end up more passionately connected because every song that comes out, there's a huge part of our creative output that's in that song, and I think it just makes us connected more uniquely. And with those guys, I think they lost the connection to the band over time, and then it just became more about like interpersonal issues that every band has, and that's not fun to focus on. So I enjoy this new era where everybody just shows up to the studio, shows up to a live show, and is just like excited to be there. And that's like it makes me feel like I'm in my 20s again.
Do you still communicate with Jordan or Nick at all?
We actually all live in the same city, so the greater San Diego area, and so surprisingly we don't run into each other much. And my door is open. I'm probably an over communicator, so, if they ever wanted to talk, I'd probably be willing to talk until or listen or whatever. Just in terms of just general communication, I'm just interested because I think that if you haven't talked to somebody in a year, as an example, right? I haven't talked to either of those guys in a year, as an example, and I mean, so much happens in life. I mean, people can have drastic life events and things that have affected them personally, and even if we feel like we've gotten to the bottom of everything, we have no reason to really keep rehashing or talking about old issues. I think there's always something new and exciting to talk about. So my door's open, but we haven't talked in quite a while.
Is Pyrethian still a band? Is that still a thing?
That's one of those things where it's sort of in the back of my mind, like when the stars align, I'd like to do that as well. But I just got to find the timing, and I don't want to spread myself too thin. So sure. it will happen. I'm just not sure when.
The door's not completely closed on it then.
No, not at all. I actually, two of the guys that did Austrian Death Machine with me have been. I'm not great at writing the Pyrethian stuff, which is the primary reason that project has had so many years between releases. It's more so like a co-write or in a lot of situations a guitar player that brings together the core of a song, and then I help refine it from there. Whereas like with my other projects, I'm a lot more hands-on as even though I'm not a guitar player in As I Dying, or I have a lot more back and forth with the songwriting process. So long story short, with Pyrethian, I'm sort of waiting for something to like fall into my lap a little bit, and those two guys are very motivated. Brandon Short, who did drums on the Austrian Death Machine record. I mean, he's an incredible drummer. I mean, some of those drumming parts on that record are as complex or maybe even more than some of the previous Pyrethian ones. So he's very motivated to bring me ideas, and when it comes, I'm ready to sing on it.
Now, getting into you a little bit now, Tim, going back, were you actually really voted most like Jesus by your high school classmates?
I'm not sure. I don't know what you'd call it. It was like through like the sports program. It was like that wasn't the title of it, but it was sort of more or less like one of those type of things, like somebody that the people in the sports department felt like was representing things as like man, these terms sound so funny so many years later. But just like a spiritual leader, or so somebody who, yeah, I guess it embodies or that lives their life in a way where they're trying to sort of push toward how Jesus would want them to live. And I don't remember the official. I think it was called like the Eagle Award or something like that, because that was the mascot of our school. But anyway, it's like a hazy memory for me, because with a lot of those kinds of awards, I mean, that's just a strange award to give anybody, because I feel like no matter who, we're all human, right? So as soon as you give somebody an award like that, no matter how amazing of a person they are, you're sort of setting them up to be like, wow, like now let's just like watch this person's life with a fine-tooth comb and see what kind of things that happen to them.
Now, do you find that since that time that your spiritual beliefs have changed or evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through different extremes in my life. I grew up really married to this like conservative evangelical point of view that the churches that I grew up in were were promoting, and I really like went headfirst into that. Like I even went so far as to get a bachelor's degree in religious studies to be able to better understand that faith and defend that faith and things like that. And then in the process, as certain things began to break down, especially as the more literal and fundamental of a religion is, I don't think that Christianity is bad by any means. I do think that when you try to like put it into a tight little box and you say, the world was literally created in 6 days, and Jonah was literally inside the belly of a large fish, not even a whale, and like all these kinds of things, you start realizing like I don't know, like there's some cognitive dissonance here. I can't really necessarily make this work with the world as I know it. And so as that started to break down, I went from like one extreme to the other, where I just sort of gave up on everything. And I feel like in the aftermath of all of that, I found a good central point now where I feel, I think it's healthy and actually beautiful for life to have a sense of spirituality, and it doesn't have to be a highly religious one necessarily. Sure. And you could believe in like the teachings of Jesus as an example, and not necessarily, I mean, what Jesus taught to me is beautiful, but when you get into some of the more, I don't know, smaller details of some of the writings of Paul and some of the nuances of like, the most recent Christian writings in the New Testament, so some of these things get a little bit out there, and they're a little bit hard to digest. But I think for me, I can just focus on what I do love and what I do appreciate, and I don't have to necessarily be mystical and overly supernatural about things, but I can find a center point.
Do you find it's a bit of a guilt factor that sort of lingers there because of being involved in heavy metal today, or metalcore, whatever you want to call it? Do you find that sort of lingers a little bit?
To me, like the super hatefully, anti-religious stuff that's been like in, I guess more so in like death metal or black metal and things like that. I feel like it's a little bit, man, there's really no way to say this that doesn't offend somebody out there, but I feel like it's a little bit juvenile. You know what I mean? It's like, if you don't believe in something, why are you so mad about it? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't get that, right? You know what I mean? Like, I remember the Lamb of God guys, like, made a funny comment to me because they were touring with Slayer at the time, and the guitar player said, man, like, Kerry King like really hates Jesus. Like, it's not like he's like just dislikes Christianity. Like, he like genuinely walks around like angry at Jesus, and it's like, wow, like that's like such a weird concept to me. You know what I mean? I don't know him personally, and so that may not have been just like a funny joke. So I'm not even picking on him per se, but just this idea that for us as we get into our 40s and 50s and these death metal bands, I mean, it's like, okay, if you want to make a thing where you feel like religion is hurting the world, like that's great. That's like a political message or a message that has like sort of like a sense of love behind it. But like if you're just, angrily trying to be blasphemous, into your 50s, I feel like, come on, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Find some new material.
Gotcha. I mean, and I find that funny that Kerry would have said that, because being that Tom is like so opposite of that, Tom is very much a practicing Christian. So I find that
Yeah,
back together.
I think part of it is just like when you see somebody who's just like so like just focused on like, I want every song to be about this, and I like even like my backstage talk is about how angry I am about this. I feel like it sort of defined him for a while. I don't know if it still does. I mean, we toured with Slayer as well, but I didn't have a lot of deep conversations with him or anything, but just sometimes like, man, like, are you really going to be angry about this thing that you supposedly don't believe in like 30 years later? Like, I mean, like when is it enough,
What do you think about Slayer reuniting? I should ask you about that.
Well, I mean, in terms of, for the festivals and for the world of heavy music to have a headliner out there, it's good that they haven't like completely gone away. I think it's good. I mean, there's going to get a lot of there's always a lot of people trash talking, but I think that the world needs more headliners that are from the heavy music world, and there's not that many of them. So I'm glad Slayer's back for some festivals at least.
What are your 3 essential metal albums? 3 albums that you're just essential hard rock metal albums that you got to listen to.
Man, in terms of what influenced me versus what I listen to now, that's like the hard part, because when I was a kid, it was like before, obviously for most of us born in the 80s, before the age of the internet. So if you wanted to find out about music, you heard originally on the radio or something, right? And I remember as a kid hearing, I don't remember if it was, I think retroactively I went back and found Master of Puppets because I had heard something from And Justice for All on the radio, but I also had heard when Pantera, Cowboys from Hell, and then eventually a lot of radio play from A Vulgar Display of Power came out. Those influenced me to sort of like go find more music along those lines and more heavy music. So like those 2 bands being on the radio when I was a kid, to me, like sent me down the rabbit hole to find the heaviest things I could find.
So Vulgar Display, Master Puppets. Is there another one that might stick out for you?
Man, in terms of a third, in terms of issuing in like a new era of like really aggressive sounding music, I actually, I feel like some of the punk hardcore crossover to me brought in a different side of it, because it was like a little bit more raw, less produced, and more aggressive. And so, there was like a local San Diego band, again, like before the age of the internet, right? So like sometimes the first time you ever hear a band is when you go see them in concert. And I remember there's a local San Diego hardcore band called No Innocent Victim. And I it's again, this whole conversation is like, things that influence me aren't necessarily what I listen to now, but those 3 records in very different ways, sent me to find like this emotion that came. It's like this inner 13-year-old, that heard these songs as a kid. It's like, man, like that feeling that I first had when I was 13, like I'm still trying to recreate and chase that feeling. And I love it.
Tim, all the best, man. I look forward to all your incredible successes, my friend.
All right, man. Thanks for taking time today, and have a good rest of your day.
All the best. You too. Take care.
All right, later.
There he is. That is Tim Lambesis, and can't wait to hear new stuff from As He Lay Dying, man. That's going to be cool. And as mentioned, they're hitting the road with Chelsea Grin for a big summer tour this year, which is going to be pretty badass as well if you're a fan of the band. Austrian Death Machine, I'm just a big fan. Quad Brutal has been getting a lot of play when it comes to my personal stuff that I listen to at home. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of that stuff. I mean, I love Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know what I mean? And thrash metal, throw those things together. And I think it's just great. Again, check out loadedradio.com for all your hard rock and metal news. Like I was mentioning, it's updated 24/7 with anything going on in hard rock and metal. It's right there for you. We got past episodes of this podcast for you. You can get the free Loader Radio app there too. And of course, don't forget the live 24-hour heavy metal radio station, dude. Internet station. You can just click a button and listen to all the hard rock and metal that you dig, and live DJs and stuff too. It's pretty damn cool, okay? All right, that's it. I'm going to wrap it up and talk to you again next week on an all-new edition of the Loader Radio podcast. I'm Scott Penfold from Loader Radio, and we'll talk to you then.